Today's panel discussion, The Future of Urban Mobility, London and North America. My name is Lucette de Metz. I'm the Head of Urban Innovation for London & Partners, which is London's business growth and destination agency. We work to support both international companies to invest and set up in London, and we also have dedicated accelerator programs to support London-based startups and scale-ups to help them grow both domestically and scale internationally. It's my absolute pleasure to be your chair for today's panel. We're delighted to be joined by a great audience, which is still increasing, but in the interest of time, we will continue on. And I have no doubt that today will be a fascinating conversation. Before we start, just a couple of quick housekeeping rules, although most of you will be well familiar with Zoom. Be grateful if you could keep yourself on mute, just to avoid any interference on the line. You're very welcome to keep your video on if your bandwidth permits. If you have any questions, technical issues, or questions you'd like to ask our panelists, please submit them through the chat box, which you can find at the bottom of your screen. And just so we can see who is in the room, we're very grateful if you could rename yourself to include both your personal name and your company name, which you can do by clicking on the three dots there in the top hand right corner of your image and then choosing rename yourself. Today's panel discussion is, of course, as the title suggests, around the future of urban mobility in London, but also in some of our key cities in North America. And today we'll be particularly looking at Chicago, Los Angeles, and Toronto. As we all know, the way we move around in our cities has been changing quite dramatically in the last year, where we've had less movement, but even in the years leading up to that, whether that be through the rise of new forms of mobility, new modes, changed consumer expectations and how we access our services, but also the impact of climate change and the need to decarbonize our transport modes. As a result of that, it is ever more vital that we not just innovate, but that we also collaborate and that we have closer dialogues, both between different cities around the world, but also within our ecosystems between the public sector, the private sector, and the citizens. So we can ensure we develop equitable, sustainable, and adaptable mobility ecosystems. And that's, of course, the key reason we are here today, to have that closer dialogue, both between our four cities that we have present here today, but also with the innovators who are participating. In today's discussion, we'll be talking about the respective cities' priorities, strategies, their reflections on the long-term impacts of COVID-19, how we're responding to climate change, the role of data, and of course, the importance of collaboration and innovation. If time permits, we'd love to also include some questions from our audience, so please do feel free to use the chat box to submit anything you would like to ask. Before we commence, I'm going to just briefly introduce our four speakers for today. So firstly, we are joined by David Leopold. David is the Director of City Solutions for City Tech Collaborative in Chicago. In this role, he facilitates cross-sector collaboration between universities, government, and private sector to drive innovative solutions to complex urban challenges. And prior to joining City Tech, David was Program Manager for the Chicago Department of Transportation, Streetscape, and Sustainable Design Program, where he directed nearly $100 million of policy, planning, and construction projects. We're also joined by Julia Thane de Mordaunt, who leads on mobility innovation for the Office of Mayor Eric Garcetti in Los Angeles. Julia is an expert at the leading edge of system change for transportation and infrastructure policy, helping governments and private sector and not-for-profits to translate visions into actionable plans that benefit the communities. Before this role, Julia worked as the Director of Urban Development at Siemens, consulting on initiatives for multiple cities across the globe in Asia, Europe, and the Americas. She's also a founder and board member for Urban Movement Labs. Thirdly, we're joined by Michael Hurwitz. Michael is the Director of Transport Innovation at Transport for London, which is, of course, London's integrated transit agency. Michael is an internationally recognized leader in future mobility and has created the UK's national programs on electromobility and autonomy. He now works to ensure transport in London is ready for the future. He leads a team of innovators that work with the market to test, implement, and change new business models and services that help to tackle the challenges that we face in London, as well as setting the policy frameworks to ensure these innovations work for all. And last but not least, we are joined by Rad Kadri. Rad is the head of Ontario's Autonomous Vehicle Innovation Network, or AVIN. Avon supports the commercialization of automotive and advanced mobility technologies and solutions in mass light vehicles, heavy-duty vehicles, transportation infrastructure, intelligent transportation systems, and transit supportive systems in vehicles. In addition, Avon is also supporting Ontario to prepare for the adoption and deployment of these advanced technologies. So I think we can all agree it's a stellar panel, and I've no doubt that 45 minutes will be far too short to cover everything they have to say, but we'll definitely make the most of that time. Without further ado, I'm going to kick off the panel by asking each of our panelists to share their reflections on the key priorities for their city and organization, as well as how COVID-19 has impacted those. And I'm going to come to Michael first. Michael, over to you.
Thanks, Lucette. Hi, everybody. Great to be here. So look, many of you will know London and TfL. We're here to deliver the Mayor's strategy of making London a city that works for all. We're a regulator, operator, network manager, and fundamental to the strategy that the Mayor wants is to be a healthy city, promoting active travel, walking, cycling and public transport, driving down on emissions and trying to make the services we offer inclusive. And it's a fascinating time where we're at the moment, particularly post-COVID. The first thing that's happened is that the economics of transport are not what they used to be. It used to be that if we were busy enough and effective enough, we would wash our face financially, but we've moved into a new era, certainly as we recover from the pandemic, that we're in that area where we're going to need subsidy. It's harder to run. So we're in that kind of social good phase again. But there are some interesting questions that we now face. Nobody quite knows how cities are going to be reset. Are we going to see a rebalancing between commercial centres and suburban elements of the city? As we work through that, though, there are some things that we do know which I think are really exciting, and I think we'll probably have the discussion about today. Certain things are accelerated. The drive to urban delivery, last mile, is greatly accelerated and isn't going to go back to where we used to be. The drive to electrification, hugely accelerated and increased. Last mile, e-mobility, scooters, that's all with us now. And there's a fascinating set of problems that we're trying to work through. And as Lucette introduced us, the goal for me and the goal for our city is that when this stuff comes, it has to work for everybody and make the city better. And that's the goal that we're trying to achieve for all the citizens and visitors to London.
Thanks, Michael, for setting us on a fascinating set of problems to discuss, which is a good way to steer us, but also a great indication of where London is still continuing to go and how we are transitioning to some new responses to climate change as well. Julia, I thought I'd come to you next. Obviously, Los Angeles is a very different city, also very spread out, and a city where the car has been very predominant. How are things working at your end?
Thanks, Lucette. And it's so wonderful to be here and to see all of you and to hear what's going on outside of Los Angeles, which I have not been able to do in quite a while. I would say, Lucette, that everything and nothing has changed as a result of the pandemic in terms of LA's transportation. One of the big come to Jesus moments we've had is that the pandemic has revealed deep inequities in our transportation system, which I think we knew about, but hadn't seen so starkly. In terms of passenger movement, what that meant is we had an extreme drop off in vehicle traffic, and then we had a much lower drop, meaning we had more riders on transit. We only had about a 60% drop in transit versus a 80% drop in vehicle traffic. What that meant is that there were two communities in LA. There was the transit reliant community, who is 80% people of color, an average household income of about $17,000, predominantly immigrants, and then everybody else, people who are staying home or purchasing new cars or able to make do without getting on transit. On the goods movement side, it was quite a different story. So one of our biggest assets in LA is that we have the Port of Los Angeles, which is a major port for goods coming in from Asia. We had so much online shopping that vessels couldn't get to their berths, that there are, at this point, almost 30 vessels at anchorage in the San Pedro Bay right outside of LA and Long Beach. And just to give you an example of that, Peloton paid $100 million to ship by air their bikes due to port congestion because they couldn't get them through fast enough through the port. So like in London, our last mile delivery industry is working overtime. What all of that means, though, is that for LA and for this mayor who has only 2 years left in office, it's the time to go big. I think we've refocused how we're looking at transit, wanting to make it the best for people who are transit reliant, which means that right now we're actually doing a study on and a pilot on fare-free transit for lower income folks in LA. We're also investing in something called universal basic mobility, which means providing sort of a slew of options for folks who don't have as much access to transit, who can't afford the full freight for private transportation options. And then, as Michael said, we are full on into electrification and zero emissionsifying everything goods movement and last mile delivery related. So that's where we really see some major public and private investment.
Thanks, Julia. Some fascinating similarities, but also some good differences. And it's interesting to know how your public transit didn't actually drop as much during the pandemic, but your vehicle traffic dropped quite a lot. Be interesting to see how that comes when we come out of this pandemic, because I know London, of course, it's something we're trying to avoid at all costs as people going back to their cars instead of going back to public transit. But also you touched on the important point of equity, which I'm sure we will come back to later on in this discussion. But I'm going to go to Rad next. Very different city yet again, Toronto, broader area in the Ontario region. Rad, share with us a little bit more around how things are going at your side.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I appreciate it. I was going to mention, I'm going to come at it not from Toronto, but from all of Ontario, and a little bit different from innovation and technology and how it leads to supporting adoption and deployment, and talk a bit about how those technologies are supporting us in this time. So, as I kind of started off with, even as the Ontario government's initiative, part of Driving Prosperity, their push through the auto plan, to support Ontario to remain a leader in the future of the automotive mobility sector. And as we all know, there's a major convergence going on where mobility is now the focus, and automakers are shifting into looking at a lot of the technologies that Michael mentioned have become a broader focus, and it's the movement of people and goods. I think that is really the focus of a lot of companies. And so through Avon, we're ensuring that we're leveraging our automotive sector, our IT cluster in Ontario, which are second, both second in North America. So we have a very, very strong history in that, and we'll continue to have that. Plus, we have a very, very vibrant entrepreneurial ecosystem, as well as high quality post-secondary institutions and top tier talent. So we're bringing those all together through Avon to ensure that we're supporting made in Ontario technologies made by homegrown and local companies to be commercialized to support some of the challenges that are faced globally, and make sure those technologies get into the market to support those challenges. And what we've proven is, if we're the jurisdiction that supports the technologies of the future, we're seeing that those technologies are being tested and piloted across our province, and that's further supported through the Government of Ontario's AV pilot regs, which are seen by industry as very forward-thinking, prioritizing safety, making sure safety is the priority, but enabling innovation. And so, with this push to commercialize new technologies in our province and across our regions, we're finding that those companies are actually partnering with regions and transportation authorities and infrastructure owner operators to pilot those technologies and help us when we talk about the movement of people and goods across our province, as well as making sure that technology gets into the global market, and the rest of the world gets a chance to buy that technology. And what we've seen, which I'm sure everybody else has seen across the sector, when I talk about the entire sector, not just automotive, but also mobility, is that it's definitely been accelerated. And again, going back to what Julia mentioned and what Michael mentioned, the technology is, the adoption of technology is being accelerated as we move people and goods. And we're seeing a lot of great things coming to pass when it comes to technology and commercializing technology. Last week, there was an announcement by by a company that started off in Palo Alto, but now has set up roots in Ontario and is expanding, and actually is expanding their presence in Toronto, that they receive support through AVEN. And that company is focused on delivery, autonomous delivery. And so part of the support that they received through the Ontario government through AVEN is to winterize their technology. So I think, you know, we're seeing an increase in the adoption of technology as we move people and goods. And I think it'll continue to help support us to reap the increased benefits that we look to gain, not just the economic and job creation benefits in our province, but also increased safety, increased productivity, and increased efficiency to support some of the other opportunities that I think we're all looking to achieve.
Thanks, Red, for those fascinating insights, and really interesting to learn for those of you who are not from the region what a big automotive center, but also tech hub it is. That was certainly something that I've learned from speaking to you, and it's really fascinating to see that lead to the adoption of, you know, new technology, new innovations, and places to test and pilot, which I'm sure will be of interest to many of our audience. David, I'm going to come to you last, I guess, but obviously you do a lot of work working sort of across the industry, and be interesting to sort of get your reflections on the priorities in the Chicago region primarily.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lisette, and really thank you to everyone for the invitation and the welcome to be here. You know, thrilled to be participating in this conversation, and I think, like Julia said, to have a little bit of travel in the day as we talk about certainly our approaches to common issues in different locations. Lisette, as you mentioned, City Tech is a unique organization. We're here in Chicago as an urban solutions accelerator, really positioned to bring together cross-sector partners around those complex challenges that are beyond the reach of one organization to solve alone. And around the topic of urban mobility, we are coming up on the 2-year anniversary of a dedicated advanced mobility initiative that we launched together with the City of Chicago, leadership from Microsoft, Bosch, Here Technologies, and over 30 other civic organizations, companies, and cities partnering together to look at a roadmap around how technology can help drive forward public policy and resident priorities in city. We had a very unique perspective during COVID around the transition of some familiar topics to the changing needs in cities. Obviously acknowledging that cities remain dynamic, and COVID, I think, certainly proved that. For many years preceding COVID, cities were talking about capacity management, but it was largely in terms of rush hour, peak congestion, congestion pricing. These were all topics that we all spoke about very frequently just 12, 13 months ago as we came into it. Where we saw the greatest need during COVID and the greatest shift is, in fact, that topic remained, but changed fundamentally around capacity constraints. And as we looked at public health management and the capacity management and demand management for our curbs, our roadways and transit, increasingly it became not about rush hour, but making sure that we were maintaining safe limits on the participants, riders, and customers, so that we can ensure safety during and beyond COVID. So one of the things that we did very early and around Chicago's priorities remains around capacity management, obviously for COVID transition, but how do we leverage that and vault that into new tools, new policies to support better efficiency overall? Early COVID, in part because of the support from London and partners and the Advanced Mobility Initiative, we were able to bring together a roundtable with London, LA, and many of our consortium partners to look at what, within our trains and buses, do we know how many people are riding at a given moment? And if that's the case, can we then safely communicate to residents that transit remains a safe and viable option and can be a part of equitable service delivery within cities? And what we discovered was that the answer was sort of. In some cases, we have fare data. In some cases, we have weight data. In some cases, we have video, but not count data, things along those lines. We were thrilled to share last week publicly a project we have underway with the Chicago Transit Authority, Microsoft, Intel, and Genentech that's actually looking at various types of technologies to understand capacity within transit, think through privacy, protection, flexibility of those technologies on how we can address near-term COVID capacity issues, but also provide a foundation for longer-term capacity management in a way that serves our goals around congestion and the overall role of government within transportation overall.
Yeah, thanks, David. Some more great insight, and you've probably touched on most of the topics we'll delve into more, anything from the use of data to the engagement, I think, with the civic sector and with citizens indirectly, or sometimes even directly, through to the importance of collaboration and, of course, safety. And it's interesting to see how we can pivot our technologies to do the same, but do something different in a time of need. So yeah, thank you all for some great comments to get us kickstarted and delve into some more of those topics. And the first one I want to kind of come back to is that sort of question around how do we provide sustainable and equitable transport. Michael, you already talked about it. This sort of is this back to being a social good. At the same time, we've seen during COVID some private sector operators and mobility companies kind of stepping up to fill in some of the gaps. At the same time, we've seen a lot of transit agencies being challenged by falling ridership and potentially moving back to the car. Just wanted to kind of get your reflections a little bit more around the role of public and private sector in providing that sustainable and equitable transport.
Well, I can go first again. I think for me, one of our duties is we're a highways authority. And I like to quote one of the legal bases for what we do. It's the Highways Act 1980 in the UK. And there's a phrase in there that says that one of our duties is to assert the rights of the public to the use and enjoyment of the highway. Now, enjoyment sometimes makes me laugh a little bit. But the key word in that phrase is public, because it has to work. What we do and our duty is to ensure that it works for everybody in the public, no matter your background or level of ability, ethnic group, age, etc. We have to make sure that what we do on the network and the way the network operates works for everybody, gives equal opportunity on the network, and does not provide for one section of community at the disbenefit to others. And what I would say is that I think you're asking the question there, Lucette, will the private sector do everything? I think it can step up to do more. I think there's an opportunity and a tremendous set of capability and invention that's out there. But there is a harsh reality that to ensure that the needs of all sectors of society are met, public's going to need to intervene. The public sector will need to intervene, and that could be, if not as an operator, but possibly as an operator, certainly as a regulator to set the parameters through which the city and transit is going to have to run.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. And I love how in the UK we can always bring up some ancient piece of legislation that still rules, although it was a very well-made point. So thank you for quoting that. But it's an interesting point, as in, what is the role of public sector, and, to what degree can private sector step up? And Julia, I thought you might have some interesting reflections from how this is maybe slightly different in LA.
It is slightly different in LA. I mean, LA is in a different position than London because we've had decades of investment in highway infrastructure and cars, which means that Angelenos spend on average $10,000 a year on transportation, which I think is about 75% more than what's spent in London, although Michael can correct me. But of that $10,000, about 90% of that is spent on private transportation. We don't really have an option but to blend public and private sector choices so that we can incentivize people not to own their own car. So what that means, realistically, is that on the transit side, we are investing billions of dollars in building out rail. At the same time, we're launching new types of services that really either borrow innovation from the private sector, like with our microtransit program, or partner with the private sector, like with our bike share program. The city of LA is also standing up new public-private partnerships. So one of the things that you mentioned in my bio, Lucette, is that I'm the founder and board member of a nonprofit organization called Urban Movement Labs. That in itself is actually a public-private partnership. Initially, it was incubated in the mayor's office. Now it's its own not-for-profit. But the point of it is very similar to the point of City Tech Collaborative, which is bringing together public sector, private sector, and communities to design and implement new mobility solutions that are meant to be sustainable and equitable by design. So this is the new model that I see not just in LA, but in other places across the US, particularly because we do have that legacy of investing in private transportation modes.
Yeah, thanks, Julia. And some fascinating examples there. And obviously, Urban Movement Labs will be around later as well in some of our breakouts, a great opportunity for our companies to engage with that. David, I know I've seen you nod on both Michael's and Julia's comments. Where do you sit on this one?
No, I think I very much agree. And I think it's similar to Urban Movement Labs. We operate in several different portfolios where we look at mobility, we look at connected infrastructure. We at City Tech also look at public health and a few other things. And I think what we acknowledge and what we see is that across those industries and across these themes, it's the same core enabling technologies that's providing some of the disruption and also providing some of the opportunity around innovation. And as we look at sensing, data collection, and advanced analytics, they are underpinning and really drove the increase that we had pre-COVID around demand-based business models on the private side. If you looked at ride shares, if you looked at scooters and many others, it was knowing where the demand was and obviously meeting that in real time. I think it's very important for us to acknowledge that those technologies continue to exist. And I learned my new favorite phrase the other day: you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. Right? Like those are tools that exist and they were deployed and have been deployed by the private sector. I think Michael's absolutely right. The pendulum is swinging back towards transit as a public good, as sort of a fundamental right of residents. And as cities look to directly address their equity and justice priorities through transportation partnerships, investment, and other things, I think these tools, these data need to absolutely be part of that. And I think as you translate demand-based business model cross-sector to the public side, you get performance-based policy and contracting. And I think our ability to use those tools in a new way to set priorities for collaboration, as well as to directly provide improved service to residents, I think there are clear dots to be connected. That's possible, certainly through partnership.
Thanks, David. So I think we've landed somewhere in the must-have public-private collaboration, particularly around new innovations, but potentially with some subsidization from the public sector to make those manageable and not all of spending $10,000 on transportation, which seems a whole lot of money, Julia. So we thought transport in London was expensive, but maybe not quite. I want to kind of come back to another topic that's sort of really front of mind, I think, pretty much everywhere, but certainly in the UK, which is adapting to climate change and decarbonization of our transit modes. And I think that's become ever more prevalent as a result of the pandemic. It's hard to pass a day where we're not talking about Build Back Better. And whilst I love that phrase, it's kind of, how do we actually really leverage this momentum and create greener and cleaner mobility? So we know a bit about kind of London's views on this, but I wanted to see how that resonates in some of the other city centres in North America. And Brad, I thought I might come to you first, because you obviously mentioned earlier you're a big automotive centre, but it's also a moment of transition in automotive. How does this play in the Toronto and wider Ontario region?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, sorry, I got a pop up there. Yeah, thanks so much. I guess, in general, you see the sector is auto sector, transportation is all kind of pushing towards that based on some of the comments that you made. I mean, in Ontario, just like a 2-month period alone, just at the end of last year, there were some major announcements from reinvestments from 3 automakers, and most of them were electric vehicle platforms that will future be built in Ontario. And so I think that's indicative of the fact that the sector in itself, when I say the sector, I mean the broader sector, the movement of people and goods, is pushing towards that area that you highlighted, is in decarbonization, looking at alternative propulsion systems, and of course I think electrification is at top of mind. I can tell you that a big part of a lot of that is utilizing technology and adoption of technology. And if I can give an example, of a few pilots that are happening in Ontario that highlight that, we look at I use a company called Pantonium that worked with the city of Belleville, just east of Toronto, and they had a route optimization platform. Well, they utilized that platform in their public transit system as a pilot, and what that did was, using the same I guess equipment, vehicles, buses, they were able to significantly increase ridership while decreasing miles traveled per bus and increasing the area of service. So I think that just as a pilot, that showed that, and you could obviously imagine that turns into quite a bit of hopefully some reduction in the amount, so it turns into some reduction in the output in terms of carbon. But that's just one example. Other parts of the province, we have a number of last mile or autonomous shuttles, electrically propelled autonomous shuttles that are being trialed and being integrated into the transit system. Notably, Ottawa undertook a trial not too long ago, integrating one of those vehicles into their system. And I think that this is just an example of how we're starting to look at different types of technologies that will support us in terms of decreasing the output of carbon into the atmosphere, I guess, as a result of transportation. But in general, the technology is going in a way that supports that outlook of, let's figure out how we not only, and talking about what Avon is accomplishing is look at using this as an opportunity for us to reap the economic benefits, but also the social and environmental benefits that we stand to gain from adopting these technologies, adopting technology in our own roads and our own transportation system. And I think everybody's of the same outlook, is that, that's the way we're all going, and technology will help us get there. And I use technology in a broad sense of the word.
Great, thanks, Rad. And really interesting to hear you obviously not just reference to, the individual vehicle electrification, but also the use of autonomous shuttles and so slightly more public modes of transit. Because of course, even if we replaced every single vehicle with an electric vehicle, we'd still have congestion and other forms of pollution that come with that. And Julie, I see you nodding, so I'm going to sense that is a particular challenge for LA. Please come in with your thoughts.
It is a particular challenge in LA, but I wanted to say first, actually, we said that the phrase "build back better," resonates a lot. I think it's partly because I'm pretty sure that was the tagline of President Biden and Vice President Harris during their campaign. So it's sort of cemented in my head as something I should know about. But I think it also reflects the moment that we're in LA, which is a rare moment of alignment. We've got a president and a vice president in the US who believe deeply in climate action and who are already taking executive action and then legislative action on that. We've got a governor of California who is putting immense pressure through regulation on auto OEMs to build electric vehicles, both on the truck side and on the passenger vehicle side. And then I have a mayor who launched LA's Green New Deal, I guess a year ago, 2 years ago, and now has 2 years left to implement his part of it. What that means in terms of the initiatives that we're doing is we are working on converting our bus fleet to all electric buses. We just passed the 11,000 publicly available and commercial chargers in LA mark, which is a huge accomplishment for us, but it's only the tip of the iceberg in terms of what we'll need to do to meet our electrification targets. And then I mentioned before, we're working on electrifying goods movement and last mile delivery. And this for us is a huge target and a huge topic. So I think it's easy for these meetings and these panels to sound like we're all patting ourselves on the back. And certainly I take credit or blame for that, where everything is going well and smoothly. But the truth is it's all going to be hard, and it all already is hard. And we're already working on, for example, like an e-cargo delivery bike facility where we're running into zoning and permitting challenges because we still have parking minimums in LA, which means that you have to build a certain amount of parking for buildings. So long story short, I'd love to do this panel again in another year and see how much progress we've all made on our Build Back Better initiatives. And hopefully there'll be an opportunity to really pat ourselves on the back.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. Noted that here, Build Back Better in a year's time, 11th of March, 2022. So that's in the diary then, I think. Let's make sure everyone's still in their jobs then. Yeah, some really great points. And I think similarly in London, we have some challenges. Also have a Green New Deal, but a mayor who has mere months left on his term. Although he may be re-elected, of course. But it's great to see that in the US, definitely kind of national, federal, and city level are kind of aligning again, which is, of course, a great move forward. So it brings us on to sort of the next topic that I think is of everybody's front of mind who's in this session, which is how to better collaborate between all of you and all of your great organizations and the innovators that have all these wonderful new technologies and solutions, and how can that work better? So Michael, I'm going to come to you first because you obviously have a directorate of people who do just that. Could you tell us a little bit more about the approach that Transport for London uses in terms of innovation?
Well, a couple of quick points to make here. The first thing is from an outward facing point of view, we've learned we've just got to be more open and honest about what we don't know the answers to. There's a tendency of the public sector to, particularly with a huge depth of knowledge and years of experience that my colleagues have, in TfL, there's always the risk that we just, expect it to be how it always was, but we don't own all of the best ideas and all the best inventions. So one of the key things that we've started to do is just tell us what our problems are, a bank of problem statements to say, this is what we're worried about and we're thinking about, who can help. But you have to back that up with a route to market, because anybody can demonstrate anything. I think it's the worst outcome if you can kind of lead somebody up the garden path and suggest that you might want to work with them, but there's no actual procurement route or a program or funding to make something actually move from a concept into service. So I think it's that mix of being outward facing with our problems, but being honest, there's some things we can't do, and only going out with those things that we really want to make happen. But I'm going to say one thing, and I don't think Julie is going to mind me mentioning this, but and actually thanks to London and Partners, because you took me there. But it was a couple of years ago, I was lucky enough to go to the Commotion LA event in LA, and I was hearing a session actually about the issues that Julia is facing about freight. And it's a different context and it's a different geography, but the issues are the same. And one of the fundamentally challenging issues is that every city is different. And so if somebody proposes something to one market, that it might be limited, they might have a fear that they can't scale. And so we're doing it now. We're just reinvigorating it now, kind of as we start to move away from all the constraints of COVID. Our Freight Lab program in London is, we cast out, we have generic issues on freight. How can you make it safer, less polluting, more efficient? And the kind of companies that bid into working with us, Appy Way, fantastic dynamic mapping of the curb. Fernhay, tremendous. The delivery truck doesn't have to do all the last mile. They have standardized carts that roll off, and a foot-based or a cycle-based concierge can do the last mile. Or Enso tires that don't produce as much pollutants and particulates as they wear. Anybody can apply that. And so we kind of came up with this idea is that I think the power of the cities that we have, and I know, David, we haven't quite gotten to actual programs yet, but I think there's a tremendous opportunity if cities like ours say, right, what applies here, test what works, and if it works, we'll say, listen, guys, do you want to try that in Chicago or LA? And I think there's a tremendous power of firstly providing the tools in a city, a way to trial, an honesty to say we can't try everything, but this we can try. But then once you've got that, I think the real potential of this community is to take an idea from city to another city. Then it becomes a much more attractive opportunity for, frankly, for the company who's working out where to invest their very scarce and precious development budgets.
Thanks so much, Michael. I think you've just summed up the ethos for the entire event. How to try something in one city and then, share it with other places that can either adapt it or just adopt it, depending on the circumstances. David, I know you do a lot of collaboration with private sector as well as with other cities, London, of course, being an example of those. Do you want to share some of your reflections as well?
No, I wholeheartedly and violently agree with Michael. I think that the more cities can be talking about these challenges that they have in common, the better, because you start to see those commonalities and learnings around understanding the very nature of the challenge before you step into a solution. And I think organizations like London and Partners, or organizations like City Tech and others can certainly help to facilitate that. I think around this pathway to scale and what it looks like, there's another point of collaboration I think that's important, where cities can engage around the product or the architecture itself. We did a little work earlier this year with Intel around this idea of a cyber physical foundation. And at its core is sort of an acknowledgement that if you look at any product, any company, any solution, all the shiny objects that we're sort of testing and deploying and looking at, 80% of them are made out of the exact same ingredients. Right? We're looking at sensing, we're looking at communication, we're looking at analytics and other things. That last 20% is what's inevitably different. One city will procure different from another. Some will have a public business model, some will have a private business model. Cultural relevancy, other things will inevitably be different. I think the more that cities can do in collaborating around the problems that show that commonality, helps to build market. I think if cities can take another step to talk about more that common component part, data standards, privacy, common reference architectures, data sharing opportunities, things that would enable multiple solutions flexibly, that actually helps to reduce costs for scaling and deployment in multiple markets. So that as we look at what's worked in London and what's worked in LA and likewise what's working in Chicago, we're able to more speedily bring those solutions to other communities with similar challenges because less of the solution needs to be recustomized. Only that which is inherently unique to those communities.
Thanks, David. Yeah, so very well made points around common standards and data. I'm conscious we're sort of fast running out of time, which is unfortunate because we have lots more that we could be talking about. But I'm going to ask you all each for one more very short comment, which I'm going to slightly change from what I was originally planning to ask. So my question was kind of in 30 seconds, what's the biggest challenge that you would like to address in the next 12 months? And I'm going to add, is there anyone on this panel you would like to work with that on? In no particular order, but Michael, you can go first. You got 30 seconds. Okay. Confidence. We need to convince people that the network is safe. We need to ensure that it is safe. We need to provide people infrastructure and a choice architecture that it's easier for people to move around. You know, we're taking the opportunity now to build more cycle lanes whilst we can. But I think that's the key thing. Just give people confidence to get out and about, confidence to try things. And well, I work with all of the panel members, and actually the confidence to try new stuff because, you know, people, it's hard to move people out of their traditional behaviors in transportation. And this is a big moment of inflection, a big moment of adjustment. And, you know, now's the time to try new things because it really might stick. Thank you, Michael. Really well made point. David?
If I had to single out the word, it's where Michael left off, which is behavior change. And I think we're at a once in a generation opportunity, particularly as people return to downtown with their commutes, to adjust that behavior and prescribe or talk about what good looks like relative to total transportation demand management for dense areas, whether or not that's in a downtown or in surrounding communities. So I think that's going to require the type of partnerships that we've talked about today, but more active engagement with employers, data sharing, other things to look at optimal service delivery that in fact can then flow to optimal spending by government. I think, you know, like Michael, I'm open to working with everyone. I will say we do not benefit from London's centralized structure through TFL. So in fact, from a governance point of view, you're a little farther ahead than us. So we're active and interested in working with cities that might just be as messy as ours are relative to the different actors that have to come in together.
Thanks so much, David. Julia?
I'll go full circle and say equity. I think in LA, we have long not been as accessible as Toronto, Chicago, or London in terms of how people can get to things and how things can get to people. And so over the next year, we're going to have to invest significantly in this topic of universal basic mobility, or basically providing mobility options that are better tailored towards what people need rather than what we think they need. In terms of who I'd like to work with, I see Michael and David quite a lot. So I would say RAD. I would love to work more with RAD and with Ontario and Toronto and see what they're doing over there.
Thanks, Julia. And I think that tees you up nicely for the final comment.
Yeah, Julia, for sure. And definitely when it's cold in Ontario, so we can hang out in your nice weather. But no, I appreciate that. And so we're on this one word theme. So mine is opportunity. And I think that Julia launched me into that as opportunity. an opportunity in two major ways. One, we've talked about all of the opportunity in terms of how we can make the movement of people and goods better, and how we're all pushing towards making the movement of people and goods better. And so the opportunity for us in Ontario to leverage all the strengths we have and continue to build solutions to all of these challenges that we've all put out there. And the opportunity is to get them into the global market. And then the other opportunity is adoption. And going back to the last question I had an answer is, we've also launched the Ontario Smart Mobility Readiness Forum. And that's a collection of municipalities across the province to talk about some of the challenges that David spoke about, talk about some of the challenges around adoption and deployment. So we're not reinventing the wheel every time that we want to do something across our province, because it's even all about collaboration and coordination. And then opportunity in the sense that, yes, Julia, let's talk about how we work better together, because I can assure you that there are a number of companies, I've only mentioned 2 today, across our province that have demonstrated great solutions. And I think going back to what David mentioned, there's an opportunity now to look at how do we get those companies to come and work with you and see how they can pilot those solutions to solve some of the challenges that you have. And I just want to shout out Michael, because I said Julia, I said Julia and David, I didn't say Michael. And Michael, you too.
Great. Thanks so much, Rad, for this final reflection. So confidence, behavior change, equity, and opportunity. I think that provides a nice summary of what we discussed today. Unfortunately, that's about all we have time for in today's panel discussion. But as you know, we'll be reconvening in 12 months' time. Hopefully, that's given everyone some great insights into what's happening and how you can participate. My colleagues will be momentarily launching a very short audience poll. I'd be really grateful if you could just take a few seconds to answer a couple of questions on what you found of the event, whether you'd like to join any future events of this nature, and whether there's anything we can help you with as a business. For those of you who have been confirmed a place for one of our topical breakout and interactive sessions, they will start in about sort of 5-ish minutes. So please do use the link that you have been sent to access those, make the most of that opportunity to meet with some more speakers and organizations and have an interactive discussion with your peers as well. Then finally, I'm just going to finish by thanking the team at London & Partners for putting this together. All of our partners and supporters, including the Department for International Trade, the Regional Board of Trade in Toronto, and of course also COMO UK, and all the organizations present on the panel. And of course, most of all, our speakers for their great insights, contributions, and their really openness to collaboration. Thank you very much all for your time. Have a wonderful rest of the day, and hopefully see you shortly on one of our discussion groups. Thank you.
Okay.
What do we do now? All sit here looking
No, I think Roxana's
carefully
going
at the
to close the session. Yes. But thanks again for joining us today, and we'll see you soon, hopefully.
Yesterday, they told me I had to stare in the camera until they told me cut. Julia, I think I have your email. You're going to get an email from me for a chat, okay?
Perfect. Okay, sounds
and
good.
Michael and David as well.
Yes, let's do it, Red. We should catch up.
Great stuff.
Thank you so much, everybody who put this on. We really appreciate
Yeah, well, I'm sure there's a lot of people involved in the logistics as well. So thank you, everybody who's kind of behind the screen.
Yeah, pleasure. But thank you. So I will wave goodbye, and I'll see you all soon, hopefully, in the virtual or real world.
That's great.